Ambassador Sarah Chen's footsteps echoed through the massive crystal halls of the Galactic Council chambers. Her face was red with anger, but she kept her head high as she walked out. Behind her, the mocking laughter of alien representatives bounced off the walls. Primitive species always make such dramatic exits. A tall, blue-skinned Zextor delegate sneered loudly enough for her to hear. Sarah's hands tightened around the data tablet she was carrying. On its screen was all the proof they needed. Thousands of images, chemical analyses, and tracking data showing how council races had been using Earth as their personal garbage dump for the past 30 years. But none of it mattered to them. They had simply laughed and called the evidence clearly fabricated by primitive technology. As she reached the massive entry doors, a small gray-colored alien with 4 arms hurried after her. It was Kixtal, her only friend in the council and representative of the Monaxians, one of the younger spacefaring races. "Ambassador Chen, please wait," Kixtal called out. "The council is making a terrible mistake. Some of us believe you." Sarah stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you, Kixtal, but belief isn't enough anymore. For 3 decades, they've been poisoning our oceans, contaminating our soil, and hiding their toxic waste in our mountains." "I understand your anger," Kixtal said softly. "But leaving the council like this—" "They left us no choice," Sarah replied, finally turning to face her friend. "Do you know what they found in the Antarctic last month? A radioactive dump site that was killing our whales. In the Amazon, chemical waste that's destroying entire ecosystems. They think because we don't have their level of space travel, we're too stupid to notice our own planet being destroyed." The Grand Council chamber doors swung open behind them. The Zextor delegate who had mocked Sarah earlier walked out, followed by 2 others. They were all nearly 8 feet tall, their blue skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that they considered a sign of their species' superiority. "Still here, little human," the lead Zextor said with a smirk. "Perhaps you'd like to present more of your amusing evidence. Those primitive scanning devices you use are barely better than children's toys." Sarah watched them walk past, her face calm but her eyes burning with determination. The Zextor were among the worst offenders, responsible for nearly 40% of the toxic dumping sites discovered on Earth. They thought humans were blind to their actions, but they were wrong. So very wrong. As the aliens disappeared down the crystal corridor, Sarah turned back to Kixtal. "You've been a good friend to Earth, so let me give you some advice. Distance yourself from the Council's actions against Earth in the coming months." "What do you mean?" Kixtal's large, silver eyes blinked in confusion. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They think we're primitive. They think our technology is a joke. They look at our rockets and laugh because they don't need chemical propulsion anymore. They see our cities and mock us because we haven't built orbital rings yet." She paused, looking out the massive window at the sprawling galactic capital city below. But they never stopped to ask themselves why a species smart enough to split the atom and decode DNA would still be using such primitive technology. Without another word, Sarah turned and walked away, leaving a worried Kixtal behind. In her pocket, her phone vibrated with a message from Earth Command. "Operation Earthcleanse is ready, awaiting your signal." The Council had made their choice. Now they would learn why it's dangerous to mistake patience for weakness and restraint for inability. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Maria Rodriguez walked through a massive underground facility that officially didn't exist. Her footsteps echoed off steel walls as she passed hundreds of workers in white lab coats rushing back and forth. The air hummed with energy from machines that weren't supposed to exist either. "Status report," she commanded, entering the central control room. The chamber was filled with glowing screens and bustling personnel monitoring various stations. Dr. James Chen, the lead scientist and brother of Ambassador Sarah Chen, looked up from his terminal. Dark circles under his eyes showed he hadn't slept in days. "We're ahead of schedule, General. The reverse engineering project is 97% complete. He gestured to a massive screen showing a 3D model of what looked like a cleaning drone, but unlike anything Earth had officially produced. We've successfully combined their waste processing technology with our own designs. The irony is beautiful. We're using their own discarded tech to build our cleanup fleet. Show me, General Rodriguez ordered. Dr. Chen led her to a massive window overlooking an assembly floor the size of 10 football fields. Thousands of sleek, silver drones were being assembled by robotic arms. Each one was about the size of a small car, shaped like a manta ray, with blue energy cores glowing at their centers. These beauties can process any type of waste, chemical, radioactive, biological, and compress it into safe containment spheres, Dr. Chen explained proudly. But here's the best part. He pressed a button, and one of the drones lit up with familiar patterns. Recognize these markings. The general smiled grimly. Zextor manufacturing signatures. Exactly. We've replicated their own industrial markings perfectly. When these drones start returning their waste, they won't be able to deny where it came from. Every piece of garbage they dumped on Earth is going back home with their own brand on it. A young lieutenant rushed up to them, tablet in hand. General, Ambassador Chen's signal just came through. The council rejected our evidence, as expected. General Rodriguez nodded. Right on schedule. Status of the global network. All stations report ready, the lieutenant replied. Australian bunkers are at 100% capacity. African facilities report full readiness. European and South American bases await your command. Dr. Chen pulled up another screen showing a global map dotted with green lights, each one a secret facility like this one, hidden on every continent. For 30 years, while alien races had arrogantly dumped their waste on Earth, humans have been quietly studying every piece of it, learning, adapting, and preparing. The council thinks we're angry about the dumping, General Rodriguez said quietly. They don't realize they gave us exactly what we needed, access to their technology. Every piece of trash they left behind was a textbook for us to study. Dr. Chen grinned. They really should have wondered why we never developed certain technologies. We could have built antimatter drives years ago, but that would have revealed our true capabilities. Sometimes appearing primitive is the best camouflage. The general's phone buzzed. A message from Ambassador Chen. Council meeting ended. Operation is green. Send the signal, General Rodriguez commanded. Activate all facilities. Begin drone deployment under cover of darkness. Remember, people, this is a cleanup operation, not a war. We're going to teach them about responsibility in a way they'll never forget. Across the globe, in hidden bunkers and secret bases, thousands of drones powered up. Their energy cores hummed to life, glowing with borrowed alien technology that would soon be turned against its creators. Humanity's response to 30 years of abuse was about to begin, and the Galactic Council would learn that underestimating Earth had been their greatest mistake. High above the facility, the stars twinkled innocently in the night sky. By tomorrow, those same stars would witness the launch of Operation Earthcleanse, and the galaxy would never be the same. High Admiral Zex Vala of the Galactic Council stood at his office window, admiring the perfect skyline of his homeworld's capital city. The three suns of the Zextor system cast a beautiful purple light across the crystal spires and floating platforms that housed billions of his people. Nothing could disturb the peace of this perfect morning. Or so he thought. Sir, a junior officer burst into his office, breaking all protocols of proper entrance. You need to see this immediately. The admiral turned, ready to scold the young officer for his lack of manners. But the words died in his throat. The officer's bioluminescent patterns were flashing in panic, something no Zextor would display unless the situation was dire. What is it? The admiral demanded. Objects entering our atmosphere, sir. Thousands of them. Security alarms began blaring across the city. Admiral Zex Vala rushed to his command console, bringing up the planetary defense screens. His heart nearly stopped at what he saw. Swarms of silver, Manta ray-shaped devices were descending from orbit, each bearing familiar Zextor manufacturing marks. "Impossible," he whispered. "These are our designs." But they weren't attacking. Instead, the devices were releasing objects, millions of objects, into the atmosphere. The Admiral zoomed in on the camera feed and felt his blood run cold. Falling from the sky were containment spheres, each filled with toxic waste. The same toxic waste his people had been dumping on Earth for decades. His communication screen lit up with incoming calls from every major city on the planet. Similar scenes were playing out across every Council race's homeworld. The humans had somehow built a massive fleet of cleanup drones, marked them with perfect replicas of each race's manufacturing signatures, and were now returning every piece of waste to its origin world. "Sir," another officer called out. "The drones, they're broadcasting something." On every screen, on every communication channel, a message began playing. It showed detailed records of each dumping incident, complete with dates, chemical compositions, and the exact harm caused to Earth's ecosystems. The evidence was undeniable, especially with the waste now literally falling from their own skies. "Get me the Council chamber," Admiral Zex Bala shouted. But when the connection went through, he saw only chaos. Representatives were shouting at each other, accusations flying as each race tried to blame the others for this disaster. On Earth, in the underground command center, General Rodriguez watched the scenes unfolding on multiple screens. Each showed a different Council homeworld dealing with their returned waste. Dr. Chen stood beside her, monitoring the drone's performance. "All drones operating at peak efficiency," he reported. "The quantum signature tracking is working perfectly. Each piece of waste is being returned exactly to the race that dumped it." "Any military response?" the general asked. "None yet," Dr. Chen smiled. "They're too shocked. Plus, what can they do? Shoot down their own marked devices. That would be admitting guilt." Ambassador Chen's face appeared on a secure channel. "The Council is in complete disarray," she reported, satisfaction clear in her voice. "The younger races are already withdrawing their support from the elder members. No one wants to be associated with this scandal." General Rodriguez nodded. "Maintain current operations. Let's make sure every single piece of waste is returned." They wanted to treat Earth like a garbage dump. Let's see how they like cleaning up their own mess. Across the galaxy, the mighty Council races were learning a harsh lesson. They had thought humans primitive, had laughed at their complaints, had ignored their evidence. Now they were choking on their own arrogance, watching as their crimes literally rained down from above. And this was only the beginning of Earth's revenge. The Galactic Council's Grand Chamber was in complete disorder. The once pristine hall, with its towering crystal columns and floating platforms, now echoed with angry shouts and accusations. Representatives from over 50 species were all trying to speak at once, their voices creating a cacophony of different languages. In the center of the chaos stood Kixtall, the four-armed Minaxian delegate. Unlike the others, he remained calm, watching the scene unfold with his silver eyes. He couldn't help but remember Ambassador Chen's warning from days ago. "This assembly is a disgrace," thundered the Zextor representative, his blue skin flashing angry patterns. "Our cities are drowning in toxic waste. Someone must be held responsible." "You dare speak of responsibility?" A tentacled Vranthi delegate rose from her seat, her color changing to deep red with anger. "The waste falling on your world bears your manufacturing marks, just as the poison raining on my world bears our symbols." The Council leader, an ancient being of pure energy contained in a crystalline form, tried to restore order. "Please, distinguished delegates, we must approach this crisis with..." "Crisis." A new voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to see Ambassador Sarah Chen standing at the chamber entrance. She walked calmly to the center of the room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "This isn't a crisis," she continued. "This is accountability." The Zextor delegate pointed at her accusingly. Your primitive species has committed an act of war. Using our own designs. Your designs? Sarah raised an eyebrow. The ones you so carelessly discarded on our primitive world. The technology you thought we were too stupid to understand. She pulled out her data tablet. Speaking of understanding, let's discuss these interesting documents we found in your toxic waste. New holograms appeared around the chamber. They showed not just waste dumping records, but evidence of other crimes against developing civilizations. Trade manipulations, resource theft, biological experiments. The chamber erupted again, but differently this time. The younger race representatives were shouting at the elder ones. Centuries-old alliances were crumbling in minutes. The Minaxian Empire withdraws from all treaties with the Zextor Dominion. Kixtal announced formally, his voice cutting through the noise. We will not be associated with those who poison developing worlds. Other younger races followed suit. One by one, they stood and denounced the actions of the elder races. The council leader's crystalline form flickered with distress as the organization began to fracture before his eyes. Back on Earth, General Rodriguez watched the council feed with satisfaction. Dr. Chen worked at his station, monitoring the continuing cleanup operation. Phase 4 is proceeding perfectly, he reported. The political fallout is even better than we predicted. 17 younger races have already reached out through back channels, seeking separate treaties with Earth. The general nodded. And the elder races' populations? In revolt, Dr. Chen grinned. Turns out their citizens don't appreciate being lied to for centuries. There are protests in every major city across their worlds. A junior officer rushed in with a new report. Sir, the Zextor military is mobilizing. Let them, General Rodriguez said calmly. They can't attack us without admitting their crimes to the whole galaxy, and if they do, she gestured to another screen showing Earth's real fleet, still hidden and waiting. They'll learn why we kept our true capabilities secret for so long. In the council chamber, Sarah Chen watched the chaos with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She caught Kixtal's eye across the room, and he gave her a small nod of respect. The mighty Galactic Council, which had stood for 10,000 years, was falling apart in a single day. Not through violence or war, but through the simple act of forcing its members to face their own crimes. And Earth was just getting started. Dr. James Chen sat in his underground command center, his fingers flying over holographic controls. Around him, dozens of technicians worked at similar stations, their faces lit by the glow of screens showing data streams from across the galaxy. Begin final broadcast sequence, he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. This was the moment they had been preparing for since the first piece of alien waste was discovered on Earth. Broadcasting on all frequencies, sir, a young technician reported. The quantum encryption breakers are working. No one can shut this down. Across the galaxy, on every planet, moon, and space station, screens flicker to life. Communication devices activated without warning. Even personal tablets and entertainment systems were overtaken by the broadcast. The Elder Council race's censorship systems, which they had used to control information for millennia, were helpless against Earth's hybrid technology. In the council chamber, the arguing delegates fell silent as their own screens lit up. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the center of the room, watching their faces as the truth began to unfold before their eyes. The broadcast showed everything. Not just the waste dumping on Earth, but crimes against dozens of other developing civilizations. Secret files appeared showing how the elder races had deliberately stunted the growth of younger species. Videos played of illegal experiments on primitive worlds. Financial records revealed centuries of resource theft and market manipulation. Impossible, the Zextor delegate shouted, his blue skin pale with shock. These records were quantum-locked, stored in isolated systems. Stored in your waste, you mean? Sarah replied calmly. You were so confident in your superiority that you didn't even bother to properly destroy your sensitive data before dumping it. We found everything in those toxic shipping containers you left on our world. In the Zextor capital city, massive crowds gathered in the streets, watching the broadcast on giant public screens. Similar scenes played out across every council world. Citizens learned for the first time how their leaders have been exploiting developing civilizations, including their own ancestors centuries ago. Back in the command center, Dr. Chen received an urgent message from General Rodriguez. Status update, her hologram asked. Better than expected, he reported. The encryption-breaking algorithms we developed from their discarded tech are perfect. They can't stop the broadcast. Everyone is seeing everything. Any military response? They're too busy dealing with civilian protests. The elder race's populations are not happy with their leaders right now. In orbit around Earth, hidden satellites activated, broadcasting the truth to every corner of the galaxy. The complex web of lies and crimes that had kept the Council's elder races in power for thousands of years was unraveling in hours. Ambassador Chen watched as more younger race delegates stood and formally withdrew from Council treaties. The ancient chamber, which had housed galactic politics for millennia, was witnessing its own ending. You've destroyed everything. The Council leader's crystalline form flickered with rage. 10,000 years of order and stability. No, Sarah replied firmly. We've exposed the rot that was always there. You built your power on exploitation and secrets. We're building something better on truth and justice. Her phone buzzed with a message from her brother. Phase 5 complete. All data transmitted. No way to hide anything now. Around the galaxy, the balance of power was shifting. The elder races scrambled to maintain control as their own citizens demanded answers. The younger races, led by Kixtal and others, began forming new alliances, this time with Earth. The mighty had fallen not through violence or war, but through the simple power of truth. Earth's revenge wasn't just about returning waste. It was about cleaning up the entire corrupt system that had ruled the galaxy for too long. And now, finally, it was time for change. The Galactic Council chamber looked very different now. Gone were the grand decorations and floating platforms. The crystal columns were dark, their usual gleam dulled by the harsh reality of the moment. Only a few delegates remained, primarily from the elder races, sitting subdued in their seats. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the central podium, but this time no one laughed or mocked her. The Zextor delegate, once so proud, could barely meet her eyes. His bioluminescent patterns were dim, showing deep shame. The terms of Earth's justice are simple, Sarah began, her voice echoing in the quiet chamber. First, every elder race will establish environmental restoration funds for all worlds they damage, including Earth. She paused, looking at each delegate in turn. None dared to object. Second, all technology hoarding ends today. Knowledge will be shared fairly among all spacefaring civilizations. The days of keeping developing worlds primitive are over. Behind her, Kixtal and representatives from other younger races nodded in approval. They had chosen to stay, to help build something new from the ashes of the old council. Third, Sarah continued, a new Galactic Development Protection Act will be established. Any civilization caught exploiting developing worlds will face immediate sanctions from all member races. In the Earth Command Center, Dr. Chen and General Rodriguez watched the proceedings via secure feed. The room was quieter now, the frantic energy of the past few days replaced by a sense of accomplishment. They're accepting everything without argument, Dr. Chen observed, almost surprised. The general smiled. They have no choice. Their own populations are demanding these changes. Did you see the latest protests on the Zextor homeworld? On her screen, millions of blue-skinned citizens filled the streets of the Zextor capital, demanding their leaders sign Earth's terms. Similar scenes played out across other elder race worlds. Back in the council chamber, the Zextor delegate finally spoke, his voice humble. What of our waste? Will you continue to return it? No, Sarah replied firmly. Earth's cleanup drones will help process and properly dispose of the waste on your worlds. We're not interested in revenge. We want justice and reform. Show us you can change, and we'll help you fix this mess." The council leader's crystalline form dimmed further. "And what of the council itself?" "It will be reformed," Sarah explained. "New leadership, new rules, new purpose. No more secret committees. No more privileged elder races. Every civilization, young or old, gets an equal voice." She gestured to Kix Tall and the other younger race representatives. "These delegates have already agreed to help form a transition government. Those who sign our terms are welcome to join them." One by one, the elder race delegates stepped forward to sign the agreement. Centuries of privilege and power were ending, not with violence, but with signatures and promises of change. General Rodriguez received a message from Orbital Command. "Cleanup fleets standing by to assist signed worlds. Deploy as soon as the last signature is recorded," she ordered. "Let's show them we mean what we say about helping." In the chamber, Sarah watched as the final delegate signed. She thought about how far they'd come. From being laughed out of this very room to reshaping galactic civilization. Earth had won not through superior firepower, but through cleverness, patience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. "The terms are accepted," the council leader announced formally. "Let the record show that on this day, the old council ends and a new era begins." Sarah nodded, feeling both triumph and responsibility. "Then let's get to work. We have worlds to clean up and a galaxy to rebuild." The age of exploitation was over. The time of cooperation and fair development had begun. And it all started because some powerful races made the mistake of thinking Earth was too primitive to notice their crimes. 1 year later, the reformed Galactic Council headquarters on Earth looked nothing like its predecessor. Instead of crystal spires and floating platforms, the new building merged nature with technology. Gardens filled with plants from 1,000 worlds surrounded modern structures built with sustainable materials. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now serving as the first Earthborn Council leader, stood in her office overlooking New Delhi's skyline. Beside her, Kix Tall admired the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Your world has such beautiful colors," the four-armed alien remarked. "I understand now why humans fought so hard to protect it." Sarah smiled. "Speaking of protection, how are the new development programs working?" "Better than expected," Kix Tall replied, pulling up a holographic report. 20 previously exploited civilizations have made contact with us since the reforms. They're all receiving proper guidance now, developing at their own pace. A familiar blue-skinned figure appeared at the office door. The former Zextor delegate, now serving as head of the Environmental Restoration Committee. "Council leader," he said respectfully, his bioluminescent patterns showing humility. "The last toxic waste site on Earth has been fully cleaned. Our restoration teams are moving to help other affected worlds next week." "Thank you, Ambassador Zexvala." Sarah nodded. "Your people have shown remarkable dedication to making things right." In the underground command center, now serving as Earth's primary space traffic control, Dr. Chen and General Rodriguez reviewed the latest galactic reports. Trade between elder and younger races is up 300%. Dr. Chen noted. "Turns out when you stop hoarding technology, everyone benefits." The general smiled, watching ships from dozens of civilizations peacefully moving through Earth's orbit. "And to think they once called us primitive." "The best camouflage is letting others underestimate you," Dr. Chen replied. "Though I must admit, I don't miss pretending to be less advanced than we are." On screens around them, reports showed the galaxy transforming. The elder races' populations had embraced the changes, especially the younger generations. Schools that once taught about their species' superiority now emphasized cooperation and responsibility. Back in her office, Sarah received a call from a newly discovered civilization, making its first steps into space. Their representatives looked nervous but hopeful. "Welcome to the galactic community," she said warmly. "Don't worry, we'll make sure your people develop at your own natural pace. No exploitation, no dumping, no interference. just guidance when you need it. The aliens visibly relaxed, having heard about Earth's reforms and the new protections for developing worlds. Kix Tall watched the exchange proudly. A year ago, they would have been seen as resources to exploit. Now they're welcomed as equals. Amazing what happens when you build on justice instead of power, Sarah replied. Later that evening, she stood with her brother and General Rodriguez on the headquarters roof garden. The stars above were no longer distant, unreachable points of light. They were highways, homes, and new frontiers. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you found that first dump site? The general asked. Sarah shook her head. I just wanted them to stop poisoning our world. Instead, we ended up changing the galaxy. For the better, Dr. Chen added. Our patience and planning paid off. We didn't just clean up toxic waste. We cleaned up a toxic system. The three humans watched as ships from across the galaxy moved peacefully through the night sky. Each one represented a civilization now bound by laws of fairness and mutual respect, not exploitation and power. Earth had risen from being the galactic dumping ground to become the center of a new, more just civilization. And it all happened because humanity chose to fight not with weapons, but with wisdom, not for revenge, but for justice. The stars seemed brighter now, shining down on a galaxy finally learning to do better.